Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast interview. We are so excited to bring in the director of recruiting for 247Sports, the one and only Steve Wiltfong. Steve, Merry Christmas to you, my friend.
What's going on, Chip? Happy holidays, brother.
Yeah, thanks for taking some time for us. It should be a good Christmas, I think, for all Texas fans because of the signing class that Steve Sarkisian was able to bring in his first full cycle as head coach at Texas. Um, it, you know, I it's I'll let you just start off with, what stands out most to you about Texas signing this top 5 class and the players who are in it.
What's class that's in the top five? We've seen that before. And so we know what Texas is capable on the recruiting trail and its recruiting classes that are among the nation's best. But when you take a deeper dive at this class and you look at those classes that finished number 3 2 times in a row and then finished number 8 after that, they didn't recruit around the line of scrimmage like they did this cycle, Chip. And I'm just love the way that Sarkisian and his staff are trying to build this program up. And I tweeted that, and then you got some jackasses that are like, "Is Texas back? Is Texas back?" It's like, nah, bro, these guys are teenagers. But I like the way that it's trending. And obviously, when you look at on the offensive line, and you got Kelvin Banks, and you got Nito Umeozulu, and you got Cole Hudson. I mean, I think that those Malik Agbo, I think those are guys that you can win a lot of games with down the road. And then on the defensive front, in the front seven, I mean, Jere Bledsoe's got a chance to be a star. Justice Finkley is going to be awesome. I mean, there's so many difference makers up front. Jamon Tapp. I think Christopher Ross is a guy that we have underrated right now that will correct by February, but he's an uber athletic player at the line of scrimmage as well, explosive. So I didn't name everybody, but there's just, I just love the way that they've recruited around the line of scrimmage. Certainly you're getting Quinn Ewers in the transfer portal, and that's
Well,
massive.
let me stop you before we move on to Quinn Ewers. I because you put in so much work and you do such a deep dive into these players. Let's go kind of one by one on the offensive line with Kelvin Banks. What when you look at Kelvin Banks, what stands out?
Oh man, I mean, this is a guy that's, he's an absolute road grader up front. I mean, he's one of the premier offensive linemen in the country, and he's been part of some prolific rushing attacks on the prep level, and he's a guy that was highly coveted, and so Texas wasn't winning recruiting battles like that around the line of scrimmage for many years. So just to win that one alone is massive, and shows you the kind of difference that this staff can have on the trail compared to some other ones. I mean, like flipping Terrence Brooks is monsterish. I mean, that was a great flip, but we've seen Texas land elite corners before. I'm not trying to say Terrence Brooks isn't important, because he is. You have to fill all your rooms. But when you have a top 5 class, to have top 5 classes in the past but not be good around the line of scrimmage is almost hard to do. Texas has a top 5 class now, and they're really good around the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and you mentioned Nito, who I butcher his name every time, Netu Zulu. What stands out about Nito?
Well, I've seen Kelvin Banks live a couple times. I saw Nito live at the Future 50 event in the summer, where he was one of the top offensive linemen competing at that event, but big, long, can move, and has really played really good high school football, obviously, for one of the premier programs in the country. So going to come in with the right culture. Comes from a extremely hardworking family. This is a young man that goes on college visits, and, his parents are just such hard workers. That's something that just really stood out to a lot of college coaches, was the work ethic that his household has as like an intangible that Nito's going to bring to whichever program he decided on, which ended up being Texas. And to beat
Yeah,
Oklahoma, I mean, to beat your rival for an offensive lineman, now you don't have to play against him. He's part of you. That's the name of the game with some of these blue chip battles.
yeah, and some of these, I mean, were late commits for Texas. Malik Agbo. What stands out about Malik Agbo?
He's a kid that plays on both sides of the ball up there at Washington and up in there in Washington State. And again, when you're Texas, you're just trying to stock this room with big bodies that can move. He's 6'6", 320 pounds, that plays with a motor, and so he's a guy that'll come in and help push the room. And obviously, it was an emphasis for Texas to load up on the offensive line and defensive line, obviously, and they were able to do it. And they were able to do it with Plan A targets. That's another thing that stands out about the efforts up front is they didn't just take a bunch of warm bodies that they had to go down the list to find. These are guys that they recruited the whole cycle that they landed.
When you look at Cameron Williams, he's massive, like 6'7", 360. And, I've heard you talk about his arm length. You tell me uh, is what's exceptional about Cameron Williams.
This is a guy that might take some refinement, but he is, as you said, he is a big, massive individual that's been part of some prolific offenses at Duncanville. Similar to Nito, comes from a great program, a great culture. So he's going to come in ready to work, But this was a team that could really run the football on the prep level, and he was a big part of that.
And Cole Hudson obviously was in before some of the later announcements from the offensive line targets in this class. But what stands out about Cole Hudson?
Well, he just comes from an athletic family, right? And he's a guy that, again, another guy out of Frisco there that was part of an offense that I think averaged over 400 yards a game or something like that, Chip. So 400 rushing yards a game. So, I mean, these are guys. I mean, he is physical up front, man. He likes to demolish people. He is a tenacious blocker, and he's a guy that committed early. But he could have went to Oklahoma. He could have went to some of Texas's rivals. That was a pretty prominent recruiting win. And at one point, you really didn't know how Texas was going to close up front. So he was uber important. But he's a guy that I think will be a mainstay as a starter for many years to come up front for Texas.
Well, and on the defensive side, the first name out of your mouth was Jare Bledsoe. What do you like about him?
And Jere Bledsoe is just a freak. I mean, he's a guy that everybody would love to have. I mean, he's a guy that lives in the backfield. And when you're getting over 100 tackles playing the position that he plays, I mean, you're an absolute difference maker. I mean, he's a warrior. He's a high motor guy. And then he comes out there and rushes for over 1,200 yards also. I mean, what a unique two-way player that he is. And so, he's just a kid he's a kid that flashes on both sides of the ball all night. And, I expect him to be a major difference maker at Texas.
Well, and I think the next two names out of your mouth were Justice Finkley and Jamon Tapp. What stands out about those guys?
You got to go into SEC country and land those guys to beat Alabama, to beat LSU for those guys. Those are teams that you're going to be playing against in your new league. And I mean, Chip, you watch Texas play year in and year out, and they're going into a grown man's league, and they recruited some grown men to come help them, and Justice Finkley not only is a grown man that's physically ready to play right away, but he's very mature. He's a leader. He's a guy that's going to bring the right mentality to that position room at the University of Texas. And Jamon Tapp's athletic too, that can bring you some versatility around the line of scrimmage.
What about Zach Swanson?
Tough. I mean, him and Cole Hudson, those guys are just badasses around, up front, man. They love the physicality. They love to just be relentless and lean on people all day and wear down their adversary and just defeat people. That's just the way they play the football, on opposite sides of the line of scrimmage.
I'll tell you, I was really
Swanson's
impressed.
got a chip on his shoulder too. He sees some of the buzz that other people in his state got, and he felt like he warranted more, or his people did at least. And he's got a chance to come to Texas and write his own story here.
Steve, one of the guys who stood out to me in the state championship was Ethan Burke from Westlake, 6'7", 225, but relentless. What stands out about him?
Well, what a senior riser that probably would have blew up as a junior, but he got hurt in the Under Armour lacrosse All-America game. And I think it cost him most of his junior year, other than the state playoffs, if I'm remembering correctly. But he's a twitchy pass rusher that's got, he's got a lot of growth coming in the weight room, but he's got a chance to ultimately be one of the more athletic defensive linemen in the country in college football. He's another guy that I think will stand, has a great case for a bump before February. Obviously plays for the best high school football program in the country, in my opinion. They should have won the national championship. Give me Coach Dodge, Klubnik, and those guys in that defense against anybody, and that's who I would pick. But he's a kid that probably would have had 30 offers if he wouldn't have got hurt playing lacrosse, and he was an elite level lacrosse player. His dad's a lacrosse coach. He was committed to Maryland to play lacrosse. Flips to Texas the night before. What a spatula flip to flip him, to flip Brooks. I know Brooks is the higher ranked guy, and I mean, you need cover corners like Brooks, but Burke has a chance to be an amazing pass rusher. And just you always have a spot for players around the line of scrimmage if you're Texas right now, in my opinion. I know that's easy for me to say. I'm going to be 0-0 next year, and I'm going to drink bourbon on Sunday evenings. And those guys are going to be pouring over the film of the game that they just played the day before. But Texas, for so long, has just not been where they need to be around the line of scrimmage. So anybody that I think's athletic, that has a high upside, I got room for them in the boat, man. That was a sneaky good flip right there to take him from Michigan, and we see where Michigan's at as a program. And Utah coveted this young man. That's a guy that I think Texas fans, his name first to come.
A couple more on the defensive line, and then we'll take a quick break, come back, talk about Quinn Ewers. But you mentioned Christopher Ross, and I also want to get your thoughts on Aaron Bryant.
Well, Christopher Ross is obviously an elite shot put thrower, that is just so explosive. And you turn on his film, the first step is hard. So I know my colleague Gabe Brooks said that he was banged up this year, but I know he played at the end of the year. But the senior clips that I saw, showed just a ton of potential, like all those guys. This is a group of first contact guys. And what I mean by that is when the ball snaps, boom, they're making contact. It's like a race. Who's going to hit the offensive line first? These guys are going to be explosive. They're going to be strong. A lot of these guys play with good leverage. It's just a great combination of guys that can really play together. And then Aaron Bryant, 6'4", 305 pounds, another one from SEC country, the state of Mississippi, to beat those programs for a guy that you're going to be playing against again. And he played for a South Haven defense that was really known for keeping points off the board. And he was in the middle of that, literally. And again, stout in the middle, productive, a guy that made a lot of tackles, a guy that makes plays by the line of scrimmage, a guy that can turn you over, force fumbles. These guys are stat sheet stuffers. These aren't guys that are just out there being recruited because they're big and they have potential. These guys make plays right now. And oftentimes we see schools take potential guys. And again, I'm not saying these guys don't have upside. They all have they all have a ton of upside. I don't know if this shows PG-13, Chip, but they all got a lot of upside. And not only that, but they're used to making plays, and they're going to want to make plays on Saturdays.
Well, this is a Merry Christmas episode of the Flagship podcast interview, talking about Texas's recruiting class with Director of Recruiting 247 Sports, Steve Wiltfong. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about Quinn Ewers, Texas landing the number one prospect in the 2021 recruiting class, who, of course, enrolled at Ohio State, now headed to Texas. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 247 YouTube channel, we'll roll on. Steve, obviously, Quinn Ewers, once committed to Texas, decommitted, reclassified, ends up going to Ohio State. I think he played 2 snaps, both handoffs. And the Texas fan base overjoyed because he's the highest ranked recruit since Vince Young in that famed 2002 Texas recruiting class. So it may have cost them Casey Thompson, who's in the transfer portal, but what does Quinn Ewers bring to Texas?
Well, Texas is a program where you don't worry about people getting in the portal. I mean, you're building a program where you want people that are competitive as hell. And I'm not saying Casey isn't, I'm just saying in general, you're building for now. And so Quinn Ewers is a guy that you think can help you right away, but also a guy that, like you said, has a couple years of eligibility here. But when he was a sophomore at South Lake Carroll, you could argue that he was as good a quarterback as there was in the country. He threw for over 4,000 yards, 45 touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions, completed over 70% of his passes against some of the best high school football in the country, and came back as a junior, led his team to the state championship game, playing through a hernia, missed some time, which took away the run element that he had, but still was accurate with the football, made good decisions. He does not turn the ball over. I know his interceptions went from 3 to 5 sophomore to junior year, but he also took away the run element from his game. So he was, playing handicapped a little bit there, but still played terrific. Sees the field well, can make all the throws, uber confident. I could go on and on about Quinn Ewers. I see you have that Sports Illustrated of Vince Young behind you. I think that I truly think you got to stack recruiting classes like this. But, if Texas can continue to recruit the offensive line and defensive line and get some guys, the Brendan Thompsons and the Terrence Brookses of the world, Bijan Robinsons. This is a team that's starting to build up to maybe putting another Sports Illustrated behind you, Chip. And then this is the early stages, and but that's the expectations for Texas. This is a recruiting class that's including Quinn Ewers, an amazing foundation. And again, for the people eavesdropping on this, these guys are 18, 19 years old. So let's not put the weight of the world on these young men next fall. Let's not hit the panic button if these guys are 8-5. But let's be excited about this foundation and see what Texas can go out there and do in 2023.
Yeah, he's made more news, let's be honest. He's made more news for reclassifying, maybe cashing in on NIL opportunities, going to Ohio State, probably going to cash in on some more NIL opportunities at Texas, which, in this day and age now, people have to get used to. That's good business. How do you think his persona will play in the locker room? He walks into a locker room. There's been reports that, maybe he is already in line for $1 million in NIL deals at Texas. How will his persona blend with, a locker room that's going to have some guys who are like way behind or getting nothing in NIL money?
Well, you're closer to that than me. I talked about that before when NIL started being brought up. Is culture in your locker room is going to have to be extremely strong now that there's more reasons for jealousy to come into the equation, right? We've also seen people think that they've arrived in things before and then not perform at the level expected of them later. So that will also be a concern for programs nationally as well. But I would like to think in a perfect world, all these guys have ambition to play football beyond the University of Texas. And within that, they can only control what they have going on themselves. And for Quinn Ewers, he's a millionaire now, but per reports. And but I assume he wants to play this game for a long time. So I hope that he and others like him, the Travis Hunters of the world, are still hungry to be the best versions of themselves in football. So time will tell how these deals impact the mentality of these young men. But I'm just going from the assumption that these guys are hungry. They're going to come in and play hard. And, Quinn wants to lead Texas to the promised land. And within that, he wants to hear his name called first in the NFL draft in a couple years. He wants to get that second contract in the NFL. So I think that Texas is just part of his journey. And with that, we'll see what Texas is capable of under center. So I think he's a kid that's competitive. I mean, again, he could have shut it down as a junior in high school and said, I'll come back as a senior. But those were his buds. He wanted to play for South Lake Carroll. He wanted to win a state championship at South Lake Carroll. So, I mean, I expect him to give it all at Texas, him to give it his all at Texas. But as we know, human nature is going to come in for some of these at some places. Program culture is never going to be more important than it is now, with real money being floated around here.
Steve, wide receiver was an up and down position in this recruiting class. It may have ended up costing Andre Coleman his job as the receivers coach at Texas. Obviously, they signed Brennan Thompson and Savion Red, but they had decommitments from Evan Stewart, Armani Wingfield, Faison Wilson. Give me your thoughts on the receiver recruiting in this cycle for Texas.
Well, Brennan Thompson has a chance to score from anywhere on the field. He's obviously one of the more electric guys in this class. And certainly, Texas would have liked to hit on a couple more. And, we'll see what transfer season brings. Maybe they find a young man they like, from now until February. I mean, maybe there's guys in the program developing that they like. Again, you're closer to that than me. I'm so in love with the way that they've recruited around the line of scrimmage and getting Quinn Ewers in the transfer portal and getting guys like Terrence Brooks that you're not going to rain on my parade by pointing out that they missed on Evan Stewart. Texas has rarely struggled to have good players in their receiver room. And maybe I'll eat those words later, but I think that their receiver room will be fine.
Well, let's get to Terrence Brooks, because obviously Texas has been losing those battles a lot to Ohio State. For guys like J.K. Dobbins, Baron Browning, I mean, the list goes on, Jeffrey Okudah. But they win a flip in this situation. And what does Terrence Brooks bring at that cornerback position?
Well, they've seen great players in that state go to the FCC and go to Ohio State. And so to get a guy who comes from terrific pedigree his football has just been in his blood forever. I mean, talking to his dad earlier in the process, there's a YouTube video out there of Terrence Brooks' first ever youth league game where the other team made it. And it's like teaches kids how to tackle properly. So he's just been fundamentally sound since before he could write cursive, and I don't know if kids still write cursive, so maybe a bad analogy for you young listeners, but Chip and I know how to write cursive. And
Indeed.
He's just a lockdown guy out there on the perimeter. And when you recruit those defensive linemen and those pass rushers, and then you put a guy like Terrence Brooks behind him, it's going to be tough sledding to get things going in the passing game.
And at safety, Texas had an exodus at safety after the 2021 season. Brian Allen, give me your thoughts on Brian Allen and Austin Jordan, and which, if any, could make an impact sooner rather than later.
I'm going to be honest with you on those guys. Those are guys, I know that Austin Jordan, I believe he was a recruitment. I know more about their recruitments than the men, but we got a full team here. You have to get my guy Gabe Brooks on to talk about those dudes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be an interesting position to watch. You mentioned stacking classes. I mean, I'll say that for Mack Brown, the decade that all Texas fans remember, the first decade of the 2000s. Mack was able to stack classes, and so Texas is going to have to do this again. in 23 and 24. There's been, a lot of talk about Arch Manning liking Texas. How do you think this, the great programs recruit great quarterbacks every year? You said that. How do you think this affects the Arch Manning recruitment?
I haven't heard one way or another. I mean, I think when you look at the schools Arch Manning's looking at, all their rosters are pretty damn good, So there's an expectation that these schools that they're championship level programs, and with that, you bring in the championship level players. I mean, Devin Brown, he goes to Ohio State. He knows what's in that room. Texas should be trying to sign the best quarterback in the country year in and year out, and they're obviously trying to do that. They have Quinn Ewers, who technically is still a 2022, in my opinion. So they got the best guy in this class. And then, they're going after the highest ranked guy in 2023. Now, I don't think they should ignore Jackson Arnold, though, at Denton Guyer. I mean, now it's easy for me to say that. My team's 0-0. I don't know what Arch Manning's telling them behind the scenes. Jackson Arnold's pretty damn good, and so there's other good quarterbacks, so if they don't get Arch Manning, that doesn't mean that they won't get a good quarterback, so it'll be interesting to see what they do.
And in terms of anything else that stands out with regard to this 2022 class, Steve?
No, I mean, for me, just an incredible foundation for this staff to really set the tone for the direction of this program. And just, I would be patient. Again, this was a program that couldn't get a damn yard against Iowa State to clinch a game 2 years ago. And so this was a program that got out toughed a lot. So it's going to take some time to change that culture. But this is a class, when I look at the guys that they recruited on the offensive line and defensive line beyond their skill sets, I think they're bringing the right mentality. I think they're alphas, like legit alphas, guys that are ready to come in and mix it up and be competitive as hell and see where this thing takes them.
So, what is the best thing and the worst thing about your job?
Well, the best thing about my job is really getting to meet people and build relationships with coaches and prospects and their families, and then really you get a new deck each year, so you get a chance to build some new relationships, or you stay connected with people. So I love that about the job, is really just the interaction with people, and including the readers that are busting my ass that think I don't like Texas. I mean, and so that's the best part of the job, is the interaction, and just being able to mix it up with people and write about people's stories. I mean, you're a terrific writer, Chip. You understand how cool that is sometimes to get some information and put it on paper that allows readers to get to better know these young men better, or their families, or where they're from. So that's the best part of the job. Worst part of the job is you work every damn weekend, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
It's
and,
never ending for you.
and
I admire, I
but
admire that
But you know what you
relentless.
sign up for.
Yeah.
But hey, man, this week I'm off. I straight from the gym, threw on this 247 Sports polo and this hat, unshaved, doing the Flagship podcast with you. That's not a bad gig,
And any other thoughts about Texas, even as it pertains to 2023? You're dialed in. I've got this great opportunity to talk to you. I'm just trying to empty your notebook here.
I mean, just keep recruiting the trenches. I mean, that's just that's the recipe. Never is Georgia, never is Alabama, and never are they getting their ass kicked at the point of attack. And so Notre Dame, rarely are they getting their ass kicked up front. I mean, those are the teams that are in the playoffs or in the discussion year in and year out. Clemson, look at the guys that they're recruiting on defense up front. That's the recipe. Again, so I mean, like Quinn Ewers, super exciting pickup, but we've seen good quarterbacks go 8-4. Let's get Quinn Ewers some people around him, which they are. And so that's what excites me most about Texas right now and the trajectory of the program. And obviously, there was a time in this cycle where it didn't look so good, particularly on the offensive line. The defensive line, the recruiting there was always on a good trajectory. But the offensive line, it really came together here at the end and still has a chance to add another 5-star that's trending on the crystal ball. So that's a hell of a close up front on the offensive line to really get your foundation going, Chip.
Yeah, we should mention Devin Campbell, who's, arguably the top interior offensive lineman in the country in the 2022 class, who will, sign in February. What are your thoughts on Campbell?
I mean, he's another ass kicker up front. I've seen him at national events be an alpha. He moves. I mean, he could be a terrific defensive lineman too. And that's the kind of prospect he is. He's just he can move, he can bend, he's strong, powerful, always has great leverage. But more than anything, he's tough. I mean, he is an alpha. He's a guy that shows up to these events and thinks he's the baddest dude in the room, and oftentimes he is. And Texas needs more of that, and I like where they stand there. And he'd be a big pickup, another big addition.
Any other targets for February that you think
Oh man, we
Texas?
gotta get Mike Roach on here. I
All
can
right.
let me go scan his list and see if there's anything I can contribute real quick before I let y'all run. Obviously they're swinging at Harold Perkins, 5-star linebacker. I know the crystal ball is all A&M. I'm actually not one of them. And I know the guys at Horns 247 think I love putting in A&M picks. I just love putting in any pick if I know it's right. And I'm talking to his family. I'm not ready to put that pick in just yet. I'm not saying A&M doesn't lead. I just don't have it like maybe some of my peers do, I think that I think Ernest Green's going to go to Georgia. So I know Texas is one that he really likes. I don't know. I think that's it. Harold Perkins, maybe, unless another name pops up. It's Texas. There might be another good player that's overlooked right now. I mean,
Yeah.
getting into that senior film and watching those guys, you might find a guy that ends up being a pro somewhere else. That's now a pro for y'all if you like his senior tape.
What is the craziest recruitment you've ever covered?
I don't know. I hate to talk about it because look, these guys are going through it for the first time. I've covered thousands of them, so it's easy for me to sit back and judge a way a process is handled. But this process will eat people up. When you're talking about alphas like Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Jimbo Fisher, Steve Sarkisian, Ryan Day, these guys didn't get their jobs by accident, and so they're very persuasive. And you're always a conversation away from your brain just being so messed up on what you thought you knew before your last conversation. And then there's coaches changing. Some people are caught up in wins and losses. And, there's all kinds of moving parts with recruiting that I never judge. The mind changing and the flips and even like you got a young man asking us, what does one school think? What does another school think? And it's like, bro, you're about to announce your decisions. Like, why? Like, I don't get why you care about that. But, I'm not judging. I just, you and I, we've been doing this for years. This is their first time going through it.
Right.
So their vantage point is so much different. So I don't know. Crazy. I just don't like to point out and say that one was crazy because for that person, it was their only experience,
Right.
and again, we've all, making life-changing decisions is hard, and some of these young men have different weights on their shoulders than others too when they make these decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great. And I'm glad people are getting a chance to get to know you because, fan is short for fanatic and
I
some,
love it. We wouldn't
some,
be doing what we do if they weren't
that's right.
fanatics. Man.
That's
They're
right.
not the casuals. We deal with the diehards, brother.
That's
We
right.
deal with the guys that know all 85 players on scholarship, some preferred walk-ons. They know the assistant coaches and where they came from. We're not out here with the casuals that show up on game day on Saturday and still rush the field.
That's right. That's right. Well, Steve, listen, and I hope you're having a great holiday and vacation, and we'll let you get back to it. Thanks so much for taking some time with us here on the Flagship Podcast interview.
Happy holidays to all y'all. And this was a live show.
Well, I mean, we record it and then we put it on the
I just see
Horns.
live up here. So I
Oh
was like,
yeah, that's our
you
that's
got to
our
get your beat button when you got me on.
that's right. Hey, we're good. We're good.
Yeah.
This is football. You gotta be tough. You gotta be ready for that. Um, Steve Wiltfong, everybody, really appreciate Steve taking some time with us. For Steve, I am Chip Brown of Horns. 247.com. We'll see you over at Horns 24/7. And until next time, right here on the Flagship Podcast, stay safe, keep the faith, and Merry Christmas.